Hi there, this is Chris, Chap in the Cup Motor Legends. Today I'm going to talk to you about why, if you've managed to persuade yourself that you definitely do need a laminated motorcycle jacket, I'm going to talk to you about why you shouldn't buy a cheap one. First thing, let's go back to fundamentals. There are three forms of construction when it comes to a waterproof motorcycle jacket. The same applies to pants. We're going to be talking about jackets today, but whatever I'm talking about in terms of jackets applies equally to pants. The first form of construction is what we call a removable waterproof membrane. Now, contrary to the understanding of many, that is not the same as a drop liner membrane. Some people assume that because the membrane can be taken out, that means you're dropping it out of the jacket and therefore it's a drop liner jacket. That's not the case. We'll talk about drop liner garments in a minute, but a drop liner membrane is fixed into a jacket. It is not removable. Now, a jacket with a removable membrane is useful when you want to ride in the heat. You take the lining out and then that aids sweating, and we need to sweat to keep cool. That's the body's natural way of keeping cool, and without a membrane in the way, the sweat can escape, we stay cool. By the same token, when it's hot, we rely on the cool oncoming air cooling the body down, and when the membrane is removed from a jacket, that happens far more effectively. The downside with garments with removable waterproof membranes is that they are not particularly waterproof for reasons that we'll go into a wee bit later. Now, the most common form of construction is the aforementioned drop liner membrane, and it's what you get in maybe 90% of waterproof motorcycle garments. It's very simple and very reliable. The membrane is sewn in terms of a jacket into the shoulders of the jacket, and it hangs down. That's why it's called a drop liner membrane. In a pant, the membrane would be sewn into the waistline and again hangs down. It's a system that works. You will stay dry. What I would point out is that after 4 or 5 hours in the rain, even though you will be dry, 4 or 5, maybe 6 hours rain, the water will seep through the outer fabric and it will sit between the outer fabric and the membrane. So the water won't pass through the membrane, you won't physically get wet. But with all that water swilling around between the chassis and the membrane, that will start to make you feel both cold and a wee bit wet, even if technically you are still bone dry. The third form of construction of a waterproof motorcycle garment, and some might consider it to be the technically superior form of construction, is what we know as lamination. So we talk about laminated motorcycle garments, laminated motorcycle jackets, laminated motorcycle trousers. Now, in a laminated garment, the membrane is heat sealed or bonded to the inner surface of the outer chassis. The membrane itself is the same kind of membrane that you will get in a drop liner jacket or with a jacket with a removable membrane. But the benefit is that when the membrane is bonded to the inner surface, water just can't pass through. So I've got an example here. This is a laminated garment or a panel from a destroyed laminated garment. The black stuff, that's the outer chassis. The grey stuff, that's the membrane. I cannot pull them apart because they're sealed together. And what that means that in heavy rain, the water will hit the garment. It just can't pass into the garment because it cannot pass through the membrane. So a garment that has a laminated membrane is never going to get soaking wet. It won't reach that stage that we sometimes talk about, which is wet out. And as the garment becomes less wet, or it doesn't get as wet, then when you stop riding, a laminated garment is going to dry out much faster. So looking at this, the question arises, why would one ever wear a garment other than a laminated garment? Because laminated garments seem at first sight to have everything going for them. And obviously that's a good question. Well, historically, one of the reasons is that laminated garments have been more expensive, and we're going to drill down on that today because that's one of the issues here. That's why we're talking about should you buy a cheap laminated jacket. The other issue is that laminated jackets have historically, and in fact still are, less comfortable. When you take the outer chassis, you bond a membrane to it, and then sometimes a third protective layer, you make the outer material stiffer, you make it less comfortable, so it doesn't mold around the body. It is not as nice to wear. The other reason is that a laminated jacket is not as warm. When you bond the membranes to the outer fabric, you lose the air gap that you would get with a drop liner or with a garment with a removable waterproof. And that gap is an air trap that holds heat from the body. So a laminated garment will not be as warm. And thirdly, the last reason why we perhaps should be careful with laminated garments is that they are more prone to failure. And that's very much what we're going to talk about a little bit later. The central premise of this review is that one should avoid buying cheap laminated motorcycle gear, and I'm going to come on and explain why we've come to that view. In fact, our view is actually that most motorcyclists are going to be much better off wearing a drop liner garment, a drop liner jacket, a drop liner pant. And that's for reasons that in some ways we've already touched upon. A drop liner garment is going to be more comfortable, it's going to be warmer, it's going to be less expensive, it's going to be more reliable. And the truth is that few of us ride in the kind of conditions where the benefits of laminated garments come into play. Now, we concede that if you frequently find yourself riding in 4, 5 or 6 hours of heavy rain, a laminated suit might be better for you. But in fact, very few of us do find ourselves in those conditions. I think the last time I did was maybe 7 or 8 years ago on a trip to Milano. It rained all day and I didn't have a laminated garment. I wish I'd had one. But very rarely do we find ourselves in those circumstances. More frequently, at the weekend, we go to the windows, we pull the curtains out, it's pouring with rain, we draw the curtains and go and put the kettle on. Now, you may have less choice if you're someone who goes touring a lot, because if there's a day where you know you've got to be on the road for 8 hours and you know it's going to rain all day, then you might want a laminated garment. But again, you're not going to find yourself in those circumstances very frequently. And if you do find yourself in that situation, if you have a drop liner garment and put a waterproof over the top, you would have created a solution that's better than a laminated jacket. And it's better because if in this laminated jacket, a top of the range Rucker Nivala, if you ride for 5 hours in heavy rain in this, you will arrive at the restaurant for lunch or the hotel in the evening with a jacket that is damp. It's not wet out, but it's still wet. If you've done that same journey with a drop liner garment with a waterproof over the top, you'll take the waterproof off and the garment underneath will be totally dry. Now, the other kind of person who might find that there's a benefit in a laminated garment is the guy who commutes more than an hour either way into work. So let's say he sets off to work, it's an hour's ride, and it's raining the whole time. When he gets into work, and if he's got a drop liner jacket, it's going to be wet. Probably not going to reach that situation, most unlikely that it's reached that situation where it's wet out, but it will be a damp jacket. And there is a chance that when he comes to put it on in the evening to go home at 6 o'clock, he will still have a wet jacket. And nobody wants to do that, particularly on a cold November's evening. That having been said, if that person on the ride into work had a drop liner jacket and put a waterproof on the top, he would again have a solution that's better than laminate, because he'd get into work, pull the waterproof on, and the jacket underneath would be bone dry. And so, even though we can acknowledge and even advocate the benefits of wearing laminated gear, we do not think that laminated is the best solution for most people. So let me draw an analogy. A laminated jacket is the motorcycle apparel equivalent of a 4x4 vehicle. In some rare circumstances, a 4x4 vehicle might be deemed invaluable, but only very rarely. Most people simply don't need a 4x4. If you want one and can afford one, go for it. But for most people, most of the time, a 4x4 brings little benefits. It will be more expensive to buy, it will drink more fuel, it will consume more tyres, and it will be more expensive to maintain. For most people, the marginal benefits of four-wheel drive will simply not be worth paying extra for. For most people, a two-wheel drive vehicle or a drop liner jacket will be the better option. Until relatively recently, and I suppose I'm talking the last 5 years, until then, laminated garments were so expensive that they tended to be out of the reach of most motorcyclists. It was the Gore company that developed the membranes, the production methods and the technology that allowed laminated membranes to work. And it was companies like Rucker and back in the day Heingerich who persevered in their attempts with Gore to make laminated gear work sufficiently well that they would be taken seriously by motorcyclists. Now in those early days, mistakes were made. The gear didn't always keep the rider as dry as it was meant to, and sometimes the resulting sandwich of materials was so stiff and uncomfortable that nobody wanted to wear it. But over time, laminated gear became more reliable and more wearable. Now, at the top of the tree in terms of Gore's laminated membranes was and is what is known as the GoreTex 3-layer Pro Shell construction. In essence, you've got an outer chassis of Cordura, you've then got the membrane bonded to the inside, and then you've got a third layer that protects the membrane from the inside. It was, and it still is, the last word in waterproofing, breathability and reliable. and it was and still is expensive to use a pro-shell construction. Now, Gore has developed slightly more comfortable, slightly cheaper two-layer solutions. The solution I have in mind is called performance shell rather than pro-shell. But what you have to acknowledge is that if a manufacturer is going to work with Gore on one of their laminated constructions, you're always going to end up with a relatively expensive garment. Over time, some of the other manufacturers, the manufacturers who weren't working with Gore, started to understand the benefits, the marketing benefits perhaps, of selling motorcycle gear with laminated membranes. But they weren't up for the processes, the complexities, the systems that needed to be employed if you were working with Gore. So they developed their own cheaper solutions. Now, because they sought cheaper solutions, they had to cut corners in some ways. And there were a number of ways they did this. They used cheaper membranes that didn't breathe quite so well. Maybe they were membranes that were slightly less waterproof. Maybe they were membranes that were less robust. But the main saving to be had when constructing a cheaper laminated garment was using inferior tape and using much less of it. And taping is the most single important, crucial component when it comes to making a laminated garment work. By contrast, with jackets with removable membranes, there's no taping at all. The membranes are fixed to the jacket by means of a zip. The problem with that form of construction is that water can get through the outer chassis and find its way into the body through the zip. And that's why jackets with removable waterproof membranes constitute the least reliable solution when it comes to waterproofing. Now, this is a drop liner garment. It's a drop liner garment turned inside out. This grey stuff's the membrane. If I turned it inside out, that's the chassis of the jacket. The taping on a jacket like this is very minimal and quite simple to apply, because in essence we don't have many panels. We have the front panel, we have a back panel, and we have the sleeves. There's a little bit of taping on the other side of the membrane here on the shoulders, here where the sleeves join the body, and there'll be some taping wherever the membrane is sewn into the jacket. But really, it's minimal and it's quite simple to apply. And that's because there are, as I said, just 4 or maybe 5 panels in the entire jacket. It's not complicated, it doesn't require great skill or great patience to apply, and it doesn't take a great deal of time to do it to an acceptable standard. We've seen already how simple it is to make a drop liner garment. Laminated garments have to be put together differently. They have to be done very, very carefully. In a laminated garment, when the manufacturer goes to the supplier of their membranes, they buy the fabric already bonded to the membrane. It's already sealed to the membrane. So whenever there's a join of panels in a laminated jacket, those joins have to be sealed on the inside with tape, and it has to be done incredibly carefully. In a high-end laminated jacket, we can be talking about maybe 50 separate panels making up the outside of the jacket. So every single seal, every single coming together of panels has to be accurately taped, because if there's any weakness in that taping, the rain can pass straight through to the body. In a drop liner jacket, you've got the first barrier is the outer chassis. Not all the rain's going to pass through that, but over time it will. You've then got the membrane to catch it. But when you've got a laminated jacket, if water passes through that, comes through the gaps in the panels, then it's going to reach straight through to the body. So if we look, for example, at this rucker jacket, you can see just how intricate the paneling is here and just how tape is used to make water ingress almost impossible. The interesting thing here, of course, is that Gore dictates how this is done. Gore as a company stands for waterproofing. They have a brand to protect, and they offer a lifetime guarantee to keep you dry on all of their products. So that's why they will simply not allow any manufacturer using a GoreTex membrane to cut corners anywhere. Now, when Rucker sent us this jacket for this video, which is very kind of them, they didn't want to give their trade secrets away and tell us exactly how much tape was used, how much time was taken. So we went to Mr. Stadler, who also uses GoreTex Pro-Shell materials on a lot of his jackets, and obviously Stadler maintains similar standards to Rucker. They're kind of brands that sit next to one another. What Mr. Stadler was prepared to tell us is that it takes one of his skilled operators between 7 and 8 hours to put together a jacket like this. The sealing of the seams and on the joins of the laminated jacket could take up to an hour and require some 30 meters of taping. And this work has to be done by highly skilled and trained individuals. Mr. Stadler's point to me was, and it is totally correct, that you cannot afford to put this amount of time into a jacket if you're going to sell it for, I don't know, £250, which is the price that these days some laminated jackets sell for. So let me explain why Mr. Stadler is so correct in his assertions. If a retailer sells a laminated jacket to a customer for £250, the first thing that has to come off that figure is £42 for VAT. That means the retailer, knowing the kind of margins that we in this industry earn, the retailer will be paying about £125 for a jacket like this. The distributor who bought it into the country will have paid the manufacturer about £90. And so the manufacturer, who will have had this jacket made in China or in some other offshore location, will have paid about £60. Clearly the factory will be wanting to make a profit, and so they will need to be making this jacket for no more than, say, £45. And from that £45 has to come all of the fabrics and materials, so the membranes, the poppers, the zips, a thermal liner perhaps, elbow and shoulder armour, and of course the factory has to also take into account the salaries of the people involved in putting the jacket together. Now, of course, we accept that the cost base of the factories where gear like this is made are not the same as the factories where gear is made for people like Rucker and Stadler. But if the total cost of making a jacket like this is £45, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to realise that they're not going to be spending an hour fixing 30 metres of tape in place. And I think that is demonstrated by this particular jacket that does indeed sell for around that £250 mark. The tape itself, this stuff that you can see here, it's cheap and flimsy. It feels more like sellotape. It is a waterproof tape, I'm sure, but it does not feel very robust. Nothing like the GoreTex tape that was used on the Rucker jacket. And there's not a lot of it. So where it meets at these seams, there's no doubling over of the tape to make sure that water can't find its way through. And frankly, this is a jacket that is just waiting to spring a leak. So you buy a laminated jacket thinking that you are buying a superior form of waterproofing, and you're not. So this jacket is just not going to last the course. It may get you through the first year warranty, but a jacket like this is simply not a long-term proposition. It's just really a matter of time. Our position at Motor Legends remains the same as it has always been. We do not think that laminated motorcycle gear is the best solution for most riders. Most of us will be better off in a drop liner suit. A drop liner outfit is going to be more reliable, more comfortable, warmer, and it's going to be sufficiently waterproof for 99% of our riding. And on the very rare occasions where it's not, a £50 waterproof overjacket or a pair of waterproof trousers will give you a solution that is better than a laminated garment. Of course, you may be one of the few riders who truly does need laminate. And for some, it has to be acknowledged that not only is laminate a way to go, it's the way to go, the only way to go. But if you are the kind of rider who genuinely does need laminate, then you may need to just bite the bullet and pay up to get the proper stuff. And that's because, as we have seen, not all laminates are born equal. Buy a cheap laminated jacket, for example, and there's a good chance that you'll need another one down the road in a year or two. What is it they say? Buy cheap and buy twice. Now, that's not a saying that we always agree with, but I think in this instance, we actually do. Me, personally, I'd go for a drop liner suit, something like the Rucker Comfort, and then the Scott waterproofs over the top. And the way I see it, that gives me the best of both worlds. I've got the benefits of a drop liner garment when it's not raining heavily. I put the Scott waterproofs over the top and suddenly I've got something better than laminate. But I am aware that with many motorcyclists, the more that one goes on at them about why they don't need laminate, the more they're going to convince themselves that they actually do. But that's just bikers. Bottom line, frankly, if you do really need laminate, if you're someone who has to ride in laminate, and if you want to know that it's always going to work, you've got to go GoreTex. It really is that simple. A GoreTex solution will never be the cheapest, but Gore knows more about the technology involved, more about laminated membranes than the rest of the industry's manufacturers put together. They're the only supplier, importantly, who oversees production of all the gear that uses its membranes. A manufacturer can't just order 100 meters of Gore membrane right from the factory. When you work with Gore, it becomes a partnership. You work with them and Gore tells you how to make the garments. Now, on a wide range of objective measures, their membranes are, in any case, the best. But Gore is the only company out there that guarantees that its membranes will never leak. And what's more, it guarantees this for life. Now, being the cynic that I am, I always used to view their guaranteed to keep you dry pledge as an exercise in marketing spin. After all, I reasoned, if the membrane was not damaged, why wouldn't it work? And if the membrane was found to be damaged, I took the view that Gore would probably come back and say, I'm sorry, that's wear and tear, it's not covered. That's certainly the view that many manufacturers take. But I think I've now witnessed sufficient number of cases to suggest that the Gore pledge really does have teeth. About a month ago, before we made this video, a customer came in to see us with a 7-year-old out of warranty Rucker Armaxian jacket that was leaking. We said, look, I'm very sorry, it's out of warranty, there's not a lot we can do, there's no point in sending it back to Rucker. So we gave him Gore's number and wished him bonne chance. Well, 2 weeks later, he wrote to us to say that he had received a cheque from Gore for £640 in compensation. Why £640? Well, that's not enough to buy him, or wasn't enough to buy him, a new top-of-the-range Rucker jacket, but I think it was more than an acceptable amount given that there was a consideration for the 7 years use he had had out of his jacket. Now, in anybody's book, that gentleman had a result. And so the way we see it, Gore's pledge potentially gives justification for going that little bit further, going that extra mile and paying that little bit more if you really are convinced that you do need laminated. Well, I hope you found that interesting and not too confusing. If you still want to look at a laminated jacket, then we've created a section. The button is sometimes up there, sometimes it's down there. That will take you to our collection of laminated jackets. Now, if you do buy a jacket from us, we try to make the buying process as simple, straightforward and risk-free as we possibly can. There's no delivery charge on any item of protected wear that you buy from us. Returns are totally free, and what's more, we give you a full 12 months in which to decide whether you do want to return something to us. We have the best price promise in the business. Now, John Lewis was rightly famed for its never knowingly undersold price promise. We go one stage better. If you can find anybody selling anything that we sell at a price that is lower than ours, we will beat that competitor's price by a full 10%. Now, there are a few terms and conditions associated with what we call our price beat. Nothing particularly onerous, but if you are going to attempt to price beat us, I suggest you go to the website and check out what those terms and conditions are. In the future, if you'd like to receive bulletins from us about new product launches, then if you go to the website, at the top of every page there's a section that says newsletter sign up. Click on there, within seconds you'll be in business. In future you'll receive our email bulletins. If however you would prefer to get your information videographically, that is to say in this form, we'd be simply delighted if you wanted to become a subscriber to our YouTube channel, and you can do that by clicking on the button below. Finally, I'd like to make a play for our fabulous little shop here at Motor Legends. We are based about a mile from the centre of Guildford, a mile from the railway station. And as I've suggested, it's a small shop, it's got a small footprint, but it's attached to our warehouse where we have more than £4 million worth of motorcycle merchandise arranged over 3 floors. Now, technically that makes this the second largest motorcycle apparel shop in the UK, but we think that we are far more than just the amount of merchandise we have here in the building. We're all about service, we're all about personal fitting. If you want to check us out on Trustpilot, we have the highest 5-star ranking in the business. When you come to see us, we'll serve you only the finest Italian illy coffee, or we'll serve you proper Yorkshire tea in a proper teapot. And who knows, if you're lucky, you might even get to sample one of our delicious motorcycle-shaped shortbread biscuits. Anyway, this has been Chris. I hope to talk to you again soon.